Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show where we talk about lectures given by Leonard Peikoff. Today, we will be talking about the lecture given in 1990 that goes by the name of Philosophy and the Real World Out There. So the general theme of this lecture is portrayed as a conflict between human knowledge and what can be done, whether knowledge can be acted upon. And that's what Peikoff really breaks for us here. So today with me is James Valliant, an expert in objectivism, and also somebody who has lived through the period which has caused Peikoff to make this lecture, to talk about the crisis that the academia, the culture, politics of the time was going through. So without further ado, can you give us a summary, James, to me and to the viewers? What was going on during that time? Why is Peikoff so concerned? And how does that what is the relationship to philosophy that we can draw from such events?
Well, the lecture was given. This is one of the famous, in America, the Boston Ford Hall Forum is a famous place where top name intellectuals and politicians and journalists would come give talks, and it provided objectivists, first Ayn Rand and then later Peikoff, a fair and friendly forum where hundreds of guests could come and ask questions. And Dr. Peikoff continued that tradition that Ayn Rand had started of lecturing every year, kept it up for a while at least, as long as he could. And this was given in 1990, a few years after he had been invited to help be part of a seminar that was called Philosophy and the Real World Out There, which was given by the American Philosophical Association, the leading professional organization of academic philosophers in the United States. Actually invited and had Dr. Peikoff there present his thoughts to the presenter, who was actually a very modern contemporary philosopher, this Professor Glidden. He comes out with a statement, which is basically a statement that everyone knows. Philosophy is bankrupt. Philosophy is useless. Philosophy has completely lost touch with the real world. Philosophy has nothing to do with any real practical concerns of ethics or politics or art or science. Has nothing. Forget it. Philosophy has rendered itself bankrupt. And philosophy was, by the end of the 20th century, pretty much dead. And you could see it was a cancer spreading out throughout the thought as such. Postmodernism was reaching a climax at the end of the 20th century. The literary theory of deconstructionism, which said that no text has a determinate meaning, that the meaning is totally subjective and up for grabs and totally dependent on our psychology. The author may not even know what he's talking about, or there may not even be an author. So literary deconstruction was taking over, postmodernism was taking over. You were getting theories from physicists talking about how not only is there just this complex, difficult to understand multiverse or something out there, but that it was all a creation of the human mind. How do we know that the universe and all the laws of physics are just not some simulation in our brain, sort of like Descartes' evil demon? They were literally falling off the deep end by the end of the 20th century. It's almost as though the irrationality of the last previous 200 years of modern philosophy had thrown them completely off the edge. Professor Glidden says it very, very well, actually. Just to quote a professor who is no objectivist, mind you, giving this talk at the American Philosophical Association that Dr. Peikoff attended. He said, philosophy has become nothing but charlatans and sophists, that their work is useless and unintelligible. Even if you could make sense of it, it would still be useless. He compared it to a new scholasticism, like the medieval monks who were totally detached from reality, but creating these logical arguments about God and heaven and theology that have no connection to life on earth. He said that there is no unifying purpose or goal to philosophy anymore. Now, of course, the diagnosis that Professor Glidden gave it was that philosophy was too rational, that the modern approach to philosophy relied too much on reason. And of course, that's exactly the opposite of the truth. He, of course, presents values. Community and compassion really have to be our values, said Professor Glidden. Now, where he got those values from, other than from his, rank emotionalism, is obvious. But people have to have values. See, people need philosophy. There's no way you can escape it. Even Professor Glidden suggests that when he says completely be emotionalist. But he's saying give up on reason. Reason has been the problem. Reason is why philosophy is out of touch. Now, can you imagine that? Dispensing with reality, dispensing with reason is exactly what turned philosophy into a useless, meaningless, indecipherable field. So just exactly the opposite. So that's what Peikoff is responding here to. And the funny thing is, when I was getting my degree in philosophy from New York University, I had very distinguished, internationally famous professors, people like Thomas Nagel. They were pretty much in agreement with Professor Glidden. Philosophy has nothing to do with reality. How many times was I told by philosophers, professors, when I would raise my hand, well, how does this connect to something in reality, to some ethical choice I have to make or some political issue of the day? How does this help me? What's the cash value? What am I getting from this? They would cynically shake their heads in a weary way, telling me that philosophy has nothing to do with reality. And I think people today would, even in the 21st century, would often get the same response from their professors.
Yeah, so this, I think, culminates in catchphrases such as "it's good in theory, but is it really good in practice?" Or "I know it's true for me, but is it true for you?" And those catchphrases may ring a bell because they were featured in Philosophy Who Needs It, a talk given by Ayn Rand. So Peikoff doesn't really go that deep into what I'm about to ask, but there are two main tendencies that objectivism identifies when it comes to divorcing knowledge from action, and that is the famous trichotomy, made famous, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, James, by Peikoff in Understanding Objectivism. And these are intrinsicism and subjectivism. So just to summarize really quickly what the trichotomy is intrinsicists, they claim to have some given that they start from. It may be some logical foundation that's not based on something on reality. More traditionally, though, it's portrayed as the word of God or something from above. Or these days, people like to say that we live in a matrix, it's all simulation. Then there is a subjectivist tendency, and that is the belief that a human being is locked within his own sensory apparatus, and that's what makes knowledge impossible for him. Now, do you well? And as I said, Peikoff does not go that deep into these two. But would you agree that this is exactly what Peikoff is talking about in many different forms and in many different applications? The concretes that he brings are a variant of one or the other, and then we'll later talk about what is the objectivism answer to the problem.
Well, that's a really good insight, because every example he gives are examples of one or the other. He early on in the lecture takes us on a little brief history of Western philosophy tour, and he notes that the ancient Greeks, for example, probably the best era in philosophy because of this, in many ways, for all of their, they were the discoverers of science and philosophy. So I guess we have to cut them some slack for their mistakes. So for all their mistakes, at least they took reality as a given. They took reality as an unquestionable fact. In effect, they assumed existence exists. It wasn't just Parmenides. If you listen to Aristotle's metaphysical argumentation, for example, his defense of the law of a non-contradiction, he said it was axiomatic. He said you can't utter a single word without accepting the law of non-contradiction. But even Plato, who believed that this world of forms was the true reality, he was committed to reality. You know, I was reading just the other day in my field, the history of biblical, the origins of the New Testament. There's a famous scholar whose most recent blog post was just about this, the metaphysical dogmatism of the ancients. And this is what he's taking on from the modern perspective. Now, mind you, he regards himself as an Aristotelian naturalist, but to him, the idea that reality should be a given or axiomatic in its status is just simply dogmatic. But of course, how would we, without a concept of reality, how on earth would we ever determine the difference between dogmatism and reason, or dogmatism and skepticism? There's no objective standard for or meaning for dogmatism. It's a stolen concept without the idea of reality. In any event, the Greeks believed in reality, took it for granted, assumed it, treated it as axiomatic. The medievals, of course, were concerned with the next world, with the kingdom of heaven, getting into the next life. They totally dismissed this world as unimportant, corrupt, a test, a vale of tears, that we would sacrifice for the next life. So they didn't even dispense with reality. It's just that reality wasn't this world that we perceive. It's this higher reality that's beyond our perception that we need to put all of our attention and mental focus onto. It is distinctly modern philosophy that separated philosophy from the real world out there, Began with Descartes, famous cogito and doubting everything. He was allowing arbitrary doubt into his mind. He questioned whether existence was axiomatic. For him, it was only consciousness that could be axiomatic. He needed to logically infer the existence of existence. He needed to logically infer that there was a reality, a real world out there. Of course, you can't infer that there's a real world out there. Reality is the basis, and the belief that that existence exists is the premise of any proof, is the premise of any demonstration. You have to have a reality out there in the first place, right? In order to make any of this kind of mental conclusion that they're coming to. It was Kant who put the capper on that, of course, who completely separated reality from cognition. Now, Kant had reality still, barely. He had this noumenal world out there. But he believed, of course, that things in themselves were completely inaccessible to the human mind. That every act of cognition, every process of our mind, rather than getting us in contact with reality, was actually separating us from reality, was blinding us to reality. So time, space, logic, entity, substance, all those things were just forms in the mind. So we go from the Greeks, who believe there's a real world out there, to the medievals, who believe there's a real world up there, as Peikoff puts it, to the moderns, who believe there is no reality and everything that matters is in here. So anything relevant is in here. So it's in here, up there, or really there's a reality out there. And since Kant, of course, it has been straight downhill for philosophy and the humanities and even the sciences and culture at large. And the manifestations of this are all over the place. The 20th century was buried in an increasing Kantianism. Now, as Peikoff points out at the end of the lecture, in a formal, explicit way, Kant is dead. You don't have academic philosophers defending Kant explicitly anymore. One reason is philosophers immediately after Kant said, well, if we can't know things in themselves, how do we even know this noumenal world exists? And so you had Hegel come out, his total idealism. He said there is no noumenal world. Kant can't tell me how we could ever even know this world. He tells us we can never know things in themselves. So the immediate response from someone like Hegel, the greatest German philosopher after Kant, was that there is no world at all. It's all just in our head, in a sense. And so you can clearly see how Kant, whether one is an explicit Kantian or not, is not really the issue. Kant put us on a direction so that even people who dismiss Kant today are completely subjectivist. They completely dispense with the real world out there. All of this metaphysical dogmatism this scholar I was mentioning is talking about. And so by their own admission, Philosophy has nothing to do with reality. And the inevitable consequence of that is the total uselessness, unintelligibility, irrelevancy of philosophy. They have declared themselves to be irrelevant. That does not, however, change the fundamental fact that the major force in human beings and in human history is philosophy. We cannot dispense with philosophy as individuals, and culture-wide, it is the determining factor. So, these ideas, the self-declared bankruptcy of philosophers does not prevent them from being the destroyers of culture, because whether they know it or not, philosophy is absolutely vital and instrumental to human thought, knowledge, and well-being, whether we can act on our ideas.
Right. And yeah, it does turn into a bit of a circus, doesn't it? And there was one humorous remark that Peikoff dropped during the course of the lecture, and that is, if your plumber turned up to you and said, well, you know, I'm not entirely sure if there is a world here, so, but you know, I make things up as I go, and you know, so far I've gotten along great. You know, you'd be alarmed. You'd be alarmed that anybody saying this about any profession, or a doctor that you would hire to give you a heart surgery. What would be your reaction to it? I mean,
you imagine?
You'd be terrified.
It's absolutely terrifying. It was absolutely hilarious. You would not hire a plumber who talked like a modern philosopher, right? I don't really even know the metaphysics of your bathroom. It's not a question, and my previous knowledge is pretty irrelevant. We can't rely on things like existence, and we can't rely on causality for sure. Causality, I mean, what can we say? So really, I don't know what I'm doing, in effect, is what the plumber would be saying, right? I'm not sure if the toilet will be the same as the toilet, or the sink will be the same as the sink, or the shower will be the same as the shower. So as a plumber, you know, I'm just going to go in there and feel my way. Like pragmatism, he points out, pragmatism was one of the immediate results of this Kantian Hegelian idea, right? Since we can't know reality, there is no reality, what we have to do is treat each new situation anew. And we have to go ultimately by our feelings. And so previous knowledge is really irrelevant. All those principles have to be thrown out the window, right? We can't be wedded to these dogmatic principles based on some dogmatic understanding of reality. Once you've dispensed with that, then it's, well, I'm going in there and I'll, go by my feelings, and I'll go by trial and error. If you were going in for surgery, can you imagine how terrified you'd be if a doctor spoke like a modern philosopher? My God, I would be looking for a new doctor. No, sir, you mean you don't have any idea of the way the body really is and what you would anticipate to find in a human body? You really have no sense of causality? You're just going to go by your feelings and what works, and maybe this time it won't work, but next time it will? No thanks, that's not my surgeon. That's not even my plumber. Yeah.
Right.
And yet we accept that from intellectuals.
When I first heard this remark by Peikoff, this humorous remark that I just referred to, it struck me as interesting. It also shines the light onto what an answer to these people would be. What is common between a plumber, a surgeon, an engineer? How do they acquire knowledge? How do they acquire knowledge that makes them valuable tradesmen, valuable craftsmen? They look at the world. They go from the perceptual. They integrate the percepts into concepts. They integrate concepts into principles, and there goes your practice of software engineering, your heart surgeon, your plumber, you name it. So I found that quite interesting because I laughed, but I did not quite understand what made that joke very sublime.
Without the concept of reality, knowledge is impossible. Knowledge of what? If it's all subjective and inside, then your knowledge is different than my knowledge, and your perspective is different than my perspective. If there is no objective truth about human physiology, if there is no objective truth about the way water goes through pipes and insulation and how pipes should be put together, there is no plumbing. Practical action relies on actual knowledge. The confidence of that action depends on the confidence of our knowledge. Could you imagine doing surgery, building a bridge, or even replacing a toilet if you didn't have a reasonable confidence in what you were doing? Don't even start. Don't even start. The bridge will collapse. The patient will die. The plumbing will flood. Yeah. So I'm not going to look at it as a pragmatist and say, oh, it is. No, you have to have the knowledge and knowledge of reality and the confident knowledge of that reality in order to confidently act in reality. That relates very much back to what we were saying in earlier lectures, doesn't it? Right? Certainty and happiness, the arbitrary. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to next. So if you shoot yourself in the foot at a very early, like on the ground floor of your epistemological skyscraper, if you say that knowledge is not possible, how can you ever reach the pinnacle of it, the certainty of your knowledge, which relates directly to certainty and happiness lecture that we have broken down at the end.
Once you admit the arbitrarian, once you say that these possibilities are arbitrary possibilities are possible about knowledge and about reality, maybe it's, Descartes' evil genius, then you've destroyed all knowledge, literally destroyed all knowledge. Anything is as valid as anything else. And you've now your doubt is dogmatic. Talk about dogmatic. That seems like a paradox, doesn't it? But that's this fellow who said that metaphysical pretensions were dogmatic over here. No, his doubt is now dogmatic, isn't it? It's baseless and arbitrary. And so, yeah, it's inevitable. It's a form of causality. Look, to act, we must know. To know, we have to have the confidence that we're in touch with reality to some degree. Get rid of reality, everything is off. Anything goes. There is no knowledge, and there's no possibility of confident action.
Right, and that means that there is no possibility of ever achieving happiness, self-esteem. You would deem universe as unintelligible, and everything really goes downhill from that, doesn't it?
Yes, Peikoff uses examples from how this has had an effect, how this bankruptcy, the self-declared bankruptcy of philosophy, has had a culture-wide effect because it can't stop doing it. And one of the examples he gives is from psychology. There are actually, believe it or not, psychotherapists who advocate self-deception, who advocate lying to yourself as a form of achieving mental health. Having an exaggerated sense of yourself, having a sense of optimism that somehow you could achieve your values. These sort of things are actually regarded as a good thing. Now you say, well, wait a minute, isn't disconnection from reality the very definition of psychosis? I mean, if I'm hearing voices or having hallucinations, if I'm not in control of my mind, isn't that the very nature of psychosis? So the psychologist there says, well, when they finally come to lock you up, okay, I'll draw the line. when you're completely rambling like an idiot, like some psychotic homeless person out there just rambling to himself on the street, and they'll lock you up. At that point, okay, then I guess maybe there's some kind of reality that we have to impose on the poor victim of the psychological problem. But the psychologist was saying otherwise, short of them locking you up in some government psychiatric hospital, if you're that far gone psychotic, no, then self-deception and self-delusion is really what he counsels his clients and his patients. Can you believe that? Instead of getting them to look at reality and their own problems and their own past and their own emotions in a realistic way, how would you correct some view, if my view of my self-estimate of myself is somehow out of whack, it's unrealistic because I think I'm, Albert Einstein in my brains or something, or Ayn Rand in my brains, that's unrealistic. And I got to get into reality about that. That's not earned self-esteem on my part at all. On the other hand, if I'm beating myself up because I've got some religious notion of how corrupt humans are, there I've got all kinds of unearned guilt, unearned sense of self-unworthiness. No, only reality can be a guide to correct psychotherapy, to getting people a more realistic view of themselves. Earned self-esteem, that's a realistic thing, again, depends upon reality, a concept of reality, a concept of reason, and the idea that the human mind can actually access reality.
Right. And you'll also notice if you listen to the lecture that most of the time Peikoff is talking about the bad things. And it's only at the end where he gets to the antidote to all of that. And it's surprisingly short. And at the core of this antidote is the benevolent universe premise, which we have discussed extensively during certainty and happiness discussion. Benevolent premise, just to remind the viewers, is the premise that universe is not beneficent. Universe will not automatically provide you milk, wine, food. It's a statement that universe is knowable if you take action to understand it. And there is a quote by Francis Bacon that goes something like, reality to be known or to be mastered has to be obeyed. So
it must be obeyed.
Right. So could you give us a brief summary? What exactly is that antidote? How does the benevolent universe premise address what Peikoff says prior to getting to this last bit of his lecture?
The benevolent universe principle is not a religious idea. It does not say that the universe is geared for our benefit and that somehow everything will automatically always work out for us. No. The benevolent universe premise is based on the idea that we can know reality. Step one, that there is a reality, and that if we do adhere to reality by means of reason, right, we can make mistakes, and those mistakes can be life and death. But if we do adhere to reality, and that requires a belief in reality and a commitment to sticking by reality, and that reality is what I have to conform to, not the other way around. Not the other way around. It's not that my mind will create reality, which is the essence of the subjectivist idea. It's the idea that if I submit to the facts of reality, if I go by reason, I can succeed. I mean, human beings have done all kinds of amazing things. We land on the moon on a dime every time. I know I've said that before. We split invisible atoms and release the power of stars. We alter invisible molecules to change living species themselves. The amazing things that we cure diseases, we create vaccines. Human beings have an amazing power, especially in the physical and medical sciences. We've demonstrated that again and again and again. Reason works because it gets us in touch with reality. We have a powerful means of doing that. If, however, we undermine the idea of reality as such, and our means of getting at reality, our only means of getting at reality, reason, then we have doomed ourselves to a malevolent universe principle. Necessarily, to dispense with reality means I am out of control, hopeless, don't know what's going on, who knows what tomorrow brings. If I dispense with reason, there's no means for me to know and deal with reality, to cope successfully with reality. Absolutely. So the solution is, of course, a philosophy of reason and reality. Philosophy of Ayn Rand's. You know, he has that wonderful quote from Atlas Shrugged. The reality the world you desire can be yours It's real. It's possible, right? Ayn Rand is actually saying that that is fundamental to our hope and chance and possibility for success and happiness, is in effect a belief in reality. And it's premised on that. It's premised on that. So what is the solution? Neo-Aristotelianism, particularly in the form of objectivism. Only by returning to the metaphysical certainty that there is a reality and that humans can know it. Oh, no, not automatically. We're capable of error. We're never going to be omniscient. It's not A is A, and that applies even to the human consciousness. But nonetheless, we are capable of knowing reality and mastering it.
The world you desire can be won.
Can be won. Thank you.
It exists. It's possible. It's yours. It's also one of my favorite quotes from.
Oh God, yeah. It'll bring tears to my eyes when I read that whole quote. Yeah.
So reason is man's means of survival. We do learn it as a first proposition. In fact, we induce it in objectivism through induction, and I think that single induction can answer the entire first part of this lecture. If you do observe how men use reason to further their survival, and you've given beautiful examples about vaccines, about spaceships, cars. We can go on for the entire night.
Oh yeah.
If you take time to observe how men use their reason to further their life, and then you listen to somebody like this gentleman that you've quoted in the beginning, you will see that reality, being the final arbiter, will point you to one side. And that I think is the essence of this lecture.
The examples he uses are just so powerful. Whether it's a physicist, right? And here's a famous science writer for the New York Times saying that physics invents reality. And that talk about the arbitrary undermining all knowledge. He admits that some little metaphysical twitch could occur and the universe could disappear tomorrow. The arbitrary destroys all knowledge. Even the most successful field in science, physics, can be totally undermined by just simply doubting reality. And look at this guy, pure Kantianism. Pure Kantian. Physicists invent reality. Whoa. Science has reached a bad spot when physics are saying they're inventing reality, not describing reality. Or take politics at the other end. In 1990, the president of the United States was George, the senior George, the father of George W. Bush, was George Bush the Elder, as he's called sometimes in my country. He was a total pragmatist. I mean, consider he made a promise to get elected. He made a promise to the American people and to his party, no new taxes. He raised the income tax rate almost immediately. What? What's coming out of your mouth? So to justify this, what does President Bush say? Well, in order to protect the welfare of the American people, I had to surrender my economic principles. What? You don't know what a principle is. You have no principles if you have this theory-practice dichotomy built in. See, there's principles over here, and then there's reality over here, and the two don't meet. And you see, it's almost like religious ideas as economic principles. They have nothing to do with reality. And so, of course, that has to be compromised anytime you... Of course, it was just a political compromise, not a fact of reality he was dealing with. But you see, it's this interpersonal compromise that he's reaching. And so for the welfare of the American people... Apparently the American people were somehow better off, so why did he make the promise no new taxes in the first place? So he has no principles. It is a pure pragmatism. And in fact, Leonard Peikoff quotes one of the great admirers and aides to George Bush, saying he's the ultimate pragmatist. He's only going to do what works. He's not wedded to ideology. And since that time, politics has only gotten worse in my mind in this country. At least there was lip service on both the left and the right before this. You know, your Reagans, your Carters, the presidents before that would normally at least give lip service to the ideology on their side and sort of be consistent with it and feel guilty when they weren't living up to it. Geez. After George Bush, it was gone. They weren't even providing this sort of nominal lip service to their ideas anymore. And you could really see it in the results. Clinton, Obama, Trump, the presidents we've had after, just rank pragmatists of the worst kind.
Yeah. Principles used in such manner are definitely a stolen concept.
Total stolen concept.
We do have two super chats. First super chat is from the Shadow Blade, who gives us £2 and says, "Keep it up, guys." Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Second one is from Enric Teller, who provides us with $9.99 and says, "Since Peikoff's 1990 talk on skepticism to nihilism, it appears now reason is abandoned to force for arbitrary ideas. Is there further devolution from that into the future from that?"
Yes, you still hear today, you're still reading in the last year and the last 2 years about physicists saying it's not merely even, are there, multiple dimensions? Is there a multi-universe out there? They're saying things like the mind creates the universe. Or could this all be some matrix-like simulation, like you said? So you hear things like that, different approaches that are just pure rank Kantianism. Now, they don't know who the heck Kant is. They've just been trained by modern philosophy and the modern approach to epistemology. Physicists, we're either creating the reality that's out there by our mind, or reality is this pliant sort of thing out there that is indeterminate. It's not even a question of multiverses and stuff. But in physics, now, on the other hand, there's been a huge criticism of deconstructionism. There's even been some pullback from postmodernism. One of the figures that Peikoff criticizes here, Professor Stanley Fish, famous for saying the humanities are basically useless, or ends in themselves that have nothing to do with reality. Stanley Fish, who said the meaning of a text is indeterminate, and we don't need theory anymore, just do what comes naturally, the famous book. Stanley Fish was enormously criticized by thinkers on both the left and the right within academia. And I think postmodernism has faced accelerating criticism. So in that sense, the demise, in effect, or large demise of deconstructionism, and to a certain extent postmodernism, is a good sign. However, we're still seeing all over the place, like I say, this biblical scholar that I quoted from just the other day, or physicists who say it's all just a matrix or all just in our head. So I would say there's pluses and there's some signs of good and some signs of bad. I don't think we've really changed that much over the last 30 years, though.
Right. So I'm getting to the end of the points that I wanted to raise with relation to this lecture. Do you want to add anything else before we wrap up?
I would just urge everyone to once more take a listen or read this lecture. It's really a very powerful statement, but it's a statement that I think most academic philosophers would even agree with the conclusion, not his all of the objectivism that Peikoff provides in giving us context and to understand this, but like Professor Glidden, the guy he started with here, I think most philosophers would absolutely agree today. Their field, their entire science, their entire subject is unintelligible, useless, meaningless, and has no connection to reality. To the extent that philosophy is no longer addressing ethical problems, political problems, epistemological and metaphysical problems in a way that is actually connected to reality and is useful to people in their lives, it is a useless topic. It is taken itself out of the realm of relevancy in one sense. They're saying we are nothing. That doesn't alter, and I'll just repeat this point from earlier, that does not alter the necessity and importance of philosophy for human beings. That bankruptcy on their part will have manifestations in our culture, and we can see it around us from science to politics. Philosophy is the chief determiner of a man's psychology and character at the end of the day, and is therefore the most important cause in human history. It's that simple. Philosophy is a subject we cannot dispense with. No one can really dispense with it, whatever your specialty.
On this wonderful note, I would like to thank our super chatters and thank all the viewers for being with us. It's for me, these sessions with James are amazing to how much I get to learn. So I'd like to remind viewers that at the start of April, ARC UK will be present at Ayn Rand Con. So please take a listen to the updates videos that Razi and the rest of the team have been posting over the last couple of weeks to find out more details. There will be many objectivists and students of objectivism from UK present during these events. A lot of people coming from overseas. I know that people such as Talz Fani, Yaron Brook are coming along with many other people, and it will be a pleasure to see all of you.
Tal and Yaron and people that you guys, those of us here at the Ayn Rand Center UK are familiar with, like Robert and Amy Nasser, all kinds of wonderful people who are frequent guests and hosts on our programs will be there. You know, going to objectivist conferences is more, you know, because you can usually get most of it later from a taped lecture, from a written essay. So not all of it, though, not all of it. Some of the content is unique to what you'll get there, but there's more than that. There's the social interaction with like-minded people, the development of making relationships, friendships, connections, professional connections. Excuse me. Going to the objectivist conferences, wherever they are, is a very meaningful, exciting, motivating, mind, emotion, everything. It is, I cannot sell going to such a conference strongly enough. And I really wish I could be there. I'm unable to come this time. I'm going to make it to London soon, I promise. But I do urge people to come to the London conference in April, in early April. It's going to be exciting. If this is your first objectivist conference, I guarantee a life-changing experience.
I think you sold it pretty well there, James. So also, don't forget to like the video if you've liked the content. Also, do subscribe and consider becoming an ARC UK member to gain access to many more benefits.
We've started a new Peikoff course. We just did the first one, covered the first lecture last Sunday. If you're a paying subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK, and initial subscriptions start at just £10 a month, you can participate in that. You can participate in Don Watkins' Communication Boot Camp. There are other benefits to it. Believe me, it's worth the price. And a week from this Sunday, we'll be starting in on Lecture 2 of Leonard Peikoff's amazing course, Induction in Physics and Philosophy, the climax of his work on induction. So I'd urge you to chime in there with Ed in saying that, boy, a subscription to Ayn Rand Center UK keeps these programs going and keeps all kinds of, and you get all kinds of other benefits too that I think are very worthwhile. So please do consider becoming a subscriber.
Absolutely. And on that note, have a great weekend, everybody, and see you next time.
See you next time.